What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting with God at the center and real-world first-hand experience. Today we're going to be talking about the evolution of bullets, projectiles. Before we do that, don't forget to scroll down if you're on Spotify or iTunes and hit some stars. Free. Monetarily takes you a few seconds of your time is all that it's going to cost you to scroll down and hit some stars if you like this podcast. I often talk about Patreon, and it occurred to me a big portion of the population may not know what Patreon is. Patreon is basically a way for you to support the content, the podcast, and humbly myself. If you like this work, this message, the information that's brought to you. And the way Patreon works is it's like a monthly pledge of your support of the content. You can give as little as $1. If you don't want a monthly thing, I get that. You can just literally go to the page and there's a Venmo link on there. You can give whatever you feel like this content is worth on there. And you get to both of those via goodshepherdtraining.com. I'm going to plug in the bio, mostly for the street cred, so you know, kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. If you've heard it before, don't care, go ahead and skip ahead. You can skip around 4 minutes from where we're talking now, and that should get you into the body of the episode. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image, a follower of Jesus Christ, a simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with L.A.P.D. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for L.A.P.D. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an F.B.I. certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector, pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table. Starting when I was a child, I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. Okay, so I think it's important talking about bullets and where we are today to understand how we got here and where we came from. So let's take a little trip down history lane. That's not really a term, I just made it up. So anyway, for a long time, we shoved lead projectiles down the barrel of guns, lead balls to be more specific. For the vast majority that we have had firearms, like shoulder-fired firearms, it was almost exclusively a round lead ball. Now, there were shot and other things, but I'm talking about the single projectile today. But it was basically a round lead ball that one shoved it down the barrel that was fired out. Now, lead is an obvious choice for a lot of reasons. It's really dense. It transfers a lot of energy. Force equals mass times acceleration. Mass is an important factor in power. Lead is an obvious choice. Another good reason is that it's soft. It's malleable. You should not do this, but I did this as a kid. You can literally chew on lead, like lead sinkers, to form them to the shape that you want them. That's how soft it is. It's a good thing if it's going at high pressures traveling down a steel barrel that it has some give to it. So, for centuries, we fired round lead balls shoved down the barrel. The really only technology was maybe a patch around there to give it a tighter seal once the powder was ignited. And then we started getting into rifling. Now, the history of rifling is fascinating in and of itself. As I understand it, it was kind of a happenstance. Those grooves were cut in to allow some place for powder fouling to go in. They found that it spun the bullet and gyroscopically stabilized the bullet. That's a big nerdy term for just saying that it spun the bullet, the projectile, and kept it on a straighter path. Gyroscopic stabilization. Once you had that rifling, it was feasible to fire a little bit better projectile. So instead of just what we had for centuries, just a round lead ball, somebody looked at that and said, how can we make this better? And they formed what we would recognize today as that bullet shape. That conical shape with a rounder front and kind of cylindrical shape with a bullet and then maybe a hollow base. Very specifically something like a Minié ball, often called a mini ball, but it's a Minié ball. It's French. But if you look at that, it has the trappings. You can see it's starting to become a bullet rather than a lead ball. They might have put some bands around it to reduce lead fouling and some other technological advances, which seem simple today, but if you don't know about them, it's quite a big leap forward. So you have this bullet shape now that's stabilized by rifling, which gives you quite a lot more ballistic advantage than you had those lead balls. It's a big reason that the American Civil War was so bloody. They were using tactics based on older technology, and they got a big jump forward with these Minié balls and these better projectiles, and they were literally just slaughtering men in droves because the tactics were not keeping pace with the technology. But let's not get too far down that rabbit hole. So these started to resemble modern bullets, but remember, we're still just talking about basically big hunks of lead in different shapes. We started getting into better propellants. Now, this is not a podcast episode on propellants, but just know that propellants started getting cleaner and faster. When they started getting faster and faster, you get to a point where you can start literally stripping lead in decent sized quantities off that bullet as it travels down the barrel. You're getting so much speed, you're literally stripping the bullet away and depositing large chunks of lead in your barrel. That's not good. So some entrepreneur out there, I don't know who, said, let's try and fix this. The first thing on this, I think, was gas checks. And I'm not a historian, guys. I'm not even a ballistician. I am none of that. I am a guy that likes guns. I'm a simple man, a student of the gun that spent his life as a professional gunfighter. This is what I understand of it. But a gas check is basically just a brass or copper disc on the base of a lead bullet to keep that hot gas off the lead and to aid in that process of pushing a bullet a little bit faster. Still, you see these around today, especially for people that hand load lead bullets and want to push them a little bit past that threshold where you start stripping that lead away. Gas checks are still a thing. You'll see a lot of bullet molds, not a lot, but you'll see lead bullet molds for stuff like the 44 mag. Sometimes they'll have what's called a gas check mold, which means you can put a gas check on there if you want. Anyway, somebody thought, this is good, how can we improve it? And they basically put the lead inside a copper jacket. That copper jacket allows you to drive that bullet much faster. And copper is harder than lead, but the lead still squishes inside the copper, so you still get that malleability that you get with lead, the good advantage of the lead. However, with that copper jacket, that copper will deposit in a bore, but at far less a degree than lead will. I mean, we're talking hundreds or thousands of rounds before copper fouling. It may affect accuracy a little, but it won't really stop the gun from working. So that copper jacket is a big leap forward. And that's pretty much still the standard today. A lead core with a copper jacket. And I say copper, there's all kinds of different alloys. It's probably some kind of copper with some amount of tin mixed in. And I'm not a metallurgist either or a chemist. But tin makes that copper into an alloy that's harder, some form of brass or something thereof, gilding metal. Just as linotite or some other compound can make a lead a little bit harder. But you get your copper jacketed lead bullet. And that was basically the reason for the copper jacket, to reduce fouling. And then people started looking at it and saying, what if we want this bullet to do more damage? What if we want it to expand? Because what you'd refer to as your full metal jacket, unless it hits bone or something really hard, it's probably not deforming or expanding. It's not designed to. It literally is just a projectile that goes from point A to point B and does its damage via transfer of energy. But how can we get it to transfer more energy? Increase that frontal diameter, not in the air, because that's bad for the travel of that bullet. They worked on that first, making the bullet more sleek and more slimline, going to what's called a Spitzer bullet, which is basically today what we just call a bullet for at least most rifles. It's a pointed bullet with or without a boat tail on the back to make it more aerodynamic. So they were worried first about getting from point A to point B, as they should have been. But once you get to point B, point A to point B is your external ballistics. And then once you get to point B, until it comes to its resting place, call that point C. So point B to point C is your terminal ballistic. So people started looking at bullets, saying, how can we make these more deadly, as people often do with weapons of war? And when it hits, a good way to do that is to increase your frontal diameter to disrupt more tissue. So for that, there's a couple of different things. The one you most think of commonly today is the hollow point. It's called a hollow point, probably more specifically a hollow cavity of some sort, and there's all different shapes of these, okay? But basically, it's just a hollow point on the front of the bullet where whatever it comes in contact with, theoretically, pushes that, remember we said lead's pretty soft, pushes that lead or that copper lead mix aside. It opens it up. That's what you classically refer to as a mushroom. You'll hear about bullets mushrooming out. And that's how that does that. It gives you a way for that frontal part of that bullet to start pushing open. Now, you may or may not see this on rifle bullets. Some rifle bullets are hollow points, but many are just soft pointed because they're going at such a high velocity. You're talking a standard handgun velocity, let's say for argument's sake, and it's pretty close, right around 1,000 feet a second. 45 generally is going to be a little bit under, 9 millimeters generally going to be a little bit over, but let's say 1,000 feet a second, right around the speed of sound. Now, your average rifle bullet is going to be almost 3 times that. And there's really no average rifle, but I'm talking, 5.56 NATO, 7.62, which is your 223, 308. They're all going to be around 2,800, 3,000 feet a second, give or take a few hundred feet a second. But as you can tell just from rough estimates there, it's about 3 times the velocity. So you don't need nearly as big a cavity on the front of that bullet. You may not need a cavity at all. A lot of these will have what's called a ballistic tip, and I think that's a nozzler, that's like saying Jello instead of gelatin. It's a brand name. But the ballistic tip, the polymer tip, is just a piece of polymer that stands in to make the bullet more aerodynamic, and then when it hits something, it kind of goes away and turns into the hollow point. A lot of bullets, and this was common for hunting bullets through most of my childhood in the mid part, and still today for more affordable hunting rounds, is just a soft point bullet. It's literally just what we talked about, copper jacketed lead bullet, where the copper jacket does not go all the way to the front. It's just a little bit of exposed lead. And just that little bit, it doesn't look like much, but when that bullet hits something at 2,800 feet a second, it's definitely enough to start that bullet expanding. And those are your classic. One that I can think of is your classic hunting Remington green and white box core locks, or your Federal Power Shocks. And that's basically what they are. They're a good, proven technology, lead core, copper jacket. The copper jacket stops just short of the front of the bullet so that it starts to expand, because remember, that lead is softer. And again, because handguns travel at much slower velocities, you generally have a much larger hollow point on a handgun. If you look at the hollow point on, let's say, a 9mm versus, soft point on a lot of expanding 308, it's much bigger, even though it's a much smaller round, because the velocity is much less, so you need that. Understand that expansion and penetration are kind of a balancing act. If you get more of one, you generally get less of the other, all the things being equal. Now, you get the bullet to expand. That's great. That's a big leap forward in stopping power in firearms. But, like we said, that's an inverse relationship. Sometimes you can go too far. Sometimes that bullet can overexpand and underpenetrate. You see this in two worlds a lot, hunting. You don't want a bullet to just explode in the first couple of inches of, let's say, an elk, or especially a big bear. You want it to drive deep. You don't want it to be a full metal jacket, because you're still going to expel most of that bullet's energy outside the other side of the animal, which is kind of wasted. But you don't want it to expand so rapidly that bullet doesn't penetrate into the vital areas of an animal. Likewise, with the tactical aspect, with defensive ammunition, you don't want your bullet, despite what New Jersey may think, you don't want your bullet to be a full metal jacket for defense, because it's likely going to go through several times over a human torso. So even if you have a good legit defensive shooting and you shoot that bad guy, that bullet's likely still going to have a lot of energy when it gets through the 12, 18 inches of person that it's trying to stop. You want it to dump more of that energy inside the person. But you, again, can go too far. If that bullet overexpands, it may underpenetrate. And this is why there's so much technology and so much debate in the handgun defensive round world. That's a fine needle to thread there, because all kinds of things come into play there. What caliber are you shooting? What's your barrel length? Because barrel length greatly affects velocity. Do you want 18 inches of penetration? Do you want 12 inches of penetration? Would you rather have one that expands more and opens up wider, or one that will not expand as much but penetrate much deeper? You get all kinds of theory and thought and And a lot of really good loads in development come out of this kind of ambiguity. But anyway, we talked about making the bullet expand, and then how do we make it not expand so much? This is, the next thing. Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. Your basic one is a bonded bullet. Bonding, we talked about that lead and copper jacket. So a lot of times those are different metals, different densities. When they impact something, whatever that something might be, it might just even be water, they will separate, losing mass. That's generally not something you want. Some people say they want that. I mean, that's fine on a prairie dog, but in most situations, you don't want the bullet to just fragment and split apart. You want it to stay together to transfer that energy. And so they'll bond the bullet to keep that copper jacket on the bullet. There's two main ways that I know to do this. There may be others, but the main way that it's done commercially today is chemical bonding. They use some kind of chemical process to bond those two different metals together. So chemical bonding. And then the other one would be mechanical bonding. Literally some kind of design element in the bullet to keep it together. A good example of chemical bonding, I believe the federal HSTs, and I'm just talking off the cuff from what I know. Double check this information by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. A matter is established, says the Bible. So make sure you double check this stuff, but I believe the federal HST is a classic example of a chemically bonded bullet. Now, the quintessential, mechanical bonding of a bullet, I believe, would be the Nosler partition or the Swift A-frames. And I believe that's correct. They basically have a couple of different compartments, and they have the A-frame is a good name. Think about the letter A, and you have that letter A, and that top part has got lead in it, and that back part has lead in it. And in the middle, there's that, call it a belt or a band or a truss that travels through the center of that bullet that stops it from overexpanding. So it'll basically expand to the middle of that bullet, and it won't overexpand past that. It gives you a good, what's referred to as controlled expansion. It will expand, it will dump, it will open up that frontal area of that bullet to do more damage, but it won't expand so much that it doesn't give you adequate penetration. And that would be, again, mechanical bonding. A classic example of this, or not classic, but the example I can think of in the tactical world would be the Remington Golden Saber black belts. I think they literally have a belt of some other metal on the outside of the bullet to literally, what a belt does, it holds everything together and stops it from overexpanding past that point. And that's the black belt. And as far as basic bullets go, and as you can see, that's not very basic. There's a lot of engineering, there's a lot of science and testing that goes into these bullets. But that's your common bullets of today. There's a lot of specialty bullets. There's a lot of, let's say, the green tip light armor piercing. Basically what you do there is the opposite. You don't want it to expand. You want it to continue going straight through a lot and penetrate a lot. So you'll put something harder than lead in the nose of that bullet. I forget if it's tungsten or just straight steel. Whatever it is, there's a little cone in the front of that 5.56 projectile. So it's basically constructed of at least 3 different materials, which would be your lead, your copper jacket, and some kind of hard penetrating front. I'd like to explain some terms, because if you've just gotten into guns, or let's say you're a veteran, but you didn't really grow up in the world of guns and you were just issued an M16 and your whatever it is, M855 ammo or your M9 and your ball ammo, you may not really know a lot about the world of ammunition. You may hear all these terms and not really know what they mean and be too, embarrassed to ask at a gun counter or whatever. So I'd like to explain some of the common terms you hear bantered about today, whether or not they are important to you, whether or not they apply to you. Real quick, caliber. You probably know and have heard the term caliber, but caliber is literally just a decimal measurement in inches. If something is real easy, 50 caliber, 0.5, it's a half an inch. If something is 25 caliber, 0.25, like your 25-06, it's a quarter of an inch. and you're talking about the diameter of the bullet. Real easy. If you do it in metric, you just measure it in millimeters. 0.308 of an inch and 7.62 millimeter. We talked about full metal jacket. That's pretty much what it sounds like. Hollow point, you guys probably know what that is. And then you have something else for a lot of those intermediate rounds where you don't want a big hollow point like most slower pistol rounds. You don't want like a ballistic tip like you would in a rifle round. You might hear like a lead flat point. These are classic in a .357 Magnum, especially if you're shooting out of a longer barrel, say a 6-inch revolver for hunting or a lever action carbine. You probably don't want the hollow point pistol ammo. It's probably going to overexpand or driving it at much higher velocities. So you might get a semi-jacketed flat point. It just has a big flat exposed front. Again, good for those intermediate velocities. We talked about that just straight lead bullet. Well, we still use those today. A wad cutter, basically think of something that looks like just a lead cylinder. To make that a little bit more aerodynamic, they make what's called a semi-wad cutter. It looks like a soup can with a hat. It's the best way I can think to describe it. These are still fantastic bullets, especially if you're making your own bullets for guns that shoot at a moderate velocity. You know, your .357 Magnums, your .44 Magnums, your .45-70s. A lot of times you'll see this in conjunction with hard cast. Hard cast that we talked about, I'm not a metallurgist, I'm not a chemist, but usually it's a lead alloy, meaning they mix linotite or tin or something with the lead to make it harder than regular lead. So you have a lead alloy bullet, which is harder. And again, this aids in penetration. Lead is quite soft. A lot of times you'll see this in like the buffalo bore loads where it's for bear defense. You'll see a hard cast lead semi-wad cutter. It's a big lead semi-wad cutter, again, known for doing a lot of damage. Just the shape and profile of it. But you want it hard cast, so if it hits that front shoulder bone or a rib, it's not going to get all mangled up because lead is soft. It's going to continue to punch through. So again, hard cast semi-wad cutter. You'll hear sectional density bantered around a lot. Sectional density is basically the object's ability to penetrate. You don't have to overcomplicate that. That's just what that means. And then what's really thrown around today, kind of ad nausea, is ballistic coefficient. Ballistic coefficient is basically the ability's object to fly through the air. We talked about getting from point A to point B. The efficiency at which that is done is ballistic coefficient. For a lot of people and a lot of shooting that they do, I think this is really overblown on how important this is. If you're a spot and stalk hunter like I like to do, or a still hunter, or anywhere east of the Mississippi, almost anywhere east of the Mississippi, where you're shooting under 400 yards, you know, that criteria may make an inch or two of difference, and is that really going to make a difference? But that's what that term means if you hear it bantered around. We already covered the terms bonded bullet and controlled expansion. We talked about JHP, jacketed hollow point, and FMJ, full metal jacket. Boat tail. If you think of a boat, generally the back end is rounded off for the same reason, to travel through a median. For a boat, the ability to travel through water with less, to say more efficiently. The same reason it's done on a bullet. Just aerodynamically as opposed to hydrodynamically, that bullet travels more efficiently. So you'll see that boat tail, BT. So you might see FMJ, BT, hollow, full metal jacket, boat tail. And now you should know what those terms mean. Oh, and I should mention grain. Grain is a unit of measurement and a unit that we don't really use in anything else commonly anymore. It's not common vernacular for anything outside the gun world. We use it for powder. We use it for projectiles because it's a small measurement. I believe it is, think of it like a grain that you eat. I think it literally comes from the weight of a grain of barley or a grain of wheat. But think of it like that. More is more. You know, 150 grain bullet versus 175 grain bullet. You can picture kind of that ratio in your head. If you're talking about a 308, let's do all the crazy tactical terms in there. Let's say you've got a 308 7.62, 175 grain, polymer tipped, controlled expansion, mechanically bonded boat tail bullet. You can probably picture that in your head now that you know what all those terms mean, instead of just your eyes going blank at, Sportsman's Warehouse because everything looks the same and you get the one with the coolest box with the coolest looking animal on it. Now you can decipher those terms and know what they mean, but that's what grain means. Just a unit of measurement we don't really use much for anything else anymore. Used mostly in powder and in projectiles. But you really don't have to understand what the unit is as long as you know that more is more. And this may be too basic for a lot of you, but just know that there's an inverse relationship to that too. So let's talk about a real common one, the 5.56. Classic, most common projectile is 55 grain. Let's say, for argument's sake, 55 grain at 3,300 feet a second for your M16 standard kind of projectile. I think it might be 3,200 feet a second, but you get the idea. If I jump up to a 77 grain bullet, I may be dropping down to 2,600 feet a second. For the same caliber, the heavier projectile I get, the more velocity I lose. So that's a balancing act as well, just like penetration versus expansion. Do I want a heavy bullet at a lower velocity or a lighter bullet at a higher velocity? So with that, guys, I think that's enough for today. I don't want to make anybody's brain explode there. If you really are a ballistics nerd, you may know far more about this than I do. But realize there's a lot of people getting into what I call gun culture 2.0. They just go out and they buy an AR or they buy a Glock 19 and they go to the range. They may even, thankfully, take a training class so they're better armed citizens to protect you and I. But they don't really know. Nobody explains this to them. Even a lot of trainers, even a lot of schools. I mentioned in the bio, I'm an F.B.I. certified firearms instructor. I have also taught at one of the... I can't say because I don't want to give away who I taught for because this podcast is not affiliated with them, but one of the big premier marksmanship schools in the country. And they don't go into any depth like this. They might tell you what a hollow point is and to use it for defense, but they don't go anywhere near into this depth. So for a lot of those people, I kind of feel bad for them because they really don't know. So if you are not that person and you sat through all this, I really appreciate that. But like the Bible says, no prophet has honor in his own country. If you have a nephew or somebody you know getting into guns, maybe share this episode with them. And again, as I said, I've been a professional gunfighter. I've been blessed to get through those situations and have this training and experience to pass it on. So let me do that work for you and pass it on to somebody. A big one is a wife. I mentioned I'm, in the bio, I'm a state rifle and pistol champion. All the experience I have, I don't generally train my wife at all. Why? That's not my place. No prophet has honor in his own country. Pay somebody else to train your wife. There's a little pro tip for you. I'll have people come from all over the country to have training and for me to train them. But my advice is have somebody else train your wife. And not just a wife, maybe anybody close to you. It's just a different dynamic. So again, feel free to share this episode. If you scroll down, there's a little icon, a box with an arrow. You can hit that and then your screen should pop up if you want to message it to somebody as a text message, if you want to email it to somebody, if you want to, whatever, there's a bunch of options. Share it with somebody you know that you think might enjoy it. And if you think this content is beneficial for people that don't already know to be out there and you want to support, again, go to goodshepherdtraining.com. That's all I'll say. Just go check it out. As a thanks for listening to this long and somewhat nerdy episode of kind of the evolution of projectiles. And we've come a long way in projectiles. We covered maybe 1,000 years of projectiles in a little over 30 minutes. I do believe that projectiles have evolved. I do not believe that we evolved from monkeys. I think that's garbage. So if you learned that in school, maybe go do your own research. Anyway, back to the tactical tip of the day. Tactical tip of the day, since we talked about projectiles, is not going to be about projectiles. It's not even going to be about guns. It's going to be about knives. If you're like me, if you're like most men, I hope that listen to this podcast, you every day carry a knife all the time because you're a man and you're ready. Carry a gun, you carry a knife. If you're like me, you kind of have all kind of scenarios. You might have to go into the city when you have to get food and that fancy coffee because I can't grow it myself. And so you might be in an urban environment, and you might be like me where you're like, I've got an hour. I'm going to go hack it out in the wilderness somewhere out west. And I want a knife that can do all that. I love Tontos, but I don't have the tool for that. But if you're a gun guy, you probably have your favorite gun lubes, your tactical this, your tactical that. But let me give you a tip for a knife. Just use olive oil, canola oil. I don't care, avocado or grapeseed oil. Any kind of cooking oil. It does the same thing. It keeps the water off that blade. It'll help stop it from rusting. If you're like me, you're kind of open to opportunities. Let's say after this, if my wife's not done with work, if I have time today, there's a little stream down here. I may chance to go down there and do some fishing. If I catch a big, sockeye salmon or something, I want to cut it and gut it. Don't want whatever tactical, ultra mega, nanotechnology oil on my knife because I'm going to eat that fish. Or, like I said, I was a professional hunter and guide. Maybe I've got that knife in my pocket and I have to gut that elk and then piece out that elk so I can fit it on a pack. I don't want that kind of oil on that meat. But if it's olive oil or if it's canola oil or any of that stuff, I really don't care because it's an edible oil anyway. What do you think the Romans and all those guys used on their metal equipment, their swords and stuff back in the day? They probably didn't have petroleum-based oil. Probably used plant-based oil and it worked just fine. So for your blade, for your EDC knife, you at all plan to use it for fishing, for hunting, for cutting up an apple at work and eating it. You can literally just put a light coat of olive oil or literally grapeseed oil and anything. Pick an oil, pick a cooking oil. Get some on the block of cheese that you're cutting, it's not a big deal. Whereas if you put on there your CLP, and I like CLP, probably don't want a CLP covered cheese block in your mouth. Anyway, real easy, real basic tactical tip of the day, guys. Which brings us to the tactical verse of the day. You shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man and fear your God. I am the Lord. And if a stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you shall be as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord, your God. A couple of things I want to touch on there. For a long time, and in most cultures, we really valued older people. We really valued that last generation we had around. We valued them because they were wise, because they knew things and they could pass information on in a way that we can't just get from Googling something. Just hands-on knowledge or real-world experience. And we used to value that as a culture. We used to value that in a Judeo-Christian country that we are, whoever or not wants to say that, at least we used to be. We were founded on that. We used to value the older generation and really seek them for wisdom and knowledge. And it's a commandment. You shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man. A lot of this gun knowledge, as good as Gun Culture 2.0 is, a lot of the older gun culture knows a lot of things and has a lot of real-world wisdom that you're not going to hear from the next marketing hype that tells you need the next hot, new, whiz-bang thing. Just an old, tried-and-true knowledge. So if you know an older person that's into guns that has all this wisdom and knowledge, maybe it's your grandfather, maybe it's your great-grandfather. Sadly, a lot of men growing up today don't have that, but maybe you can meet an older man, or maybe if you're an older man and you have this wisdom and knowledge, pass it on to the next generation. It's a valuable treasure, and it seems like today we just take our old people and shove them in an old folks' home and wait for them to die, and that's sad. That's sad. They are wise, and they have things to give to society. We shouldn't just shut them out. So if you're on either side of that, help each other out. Love your neighbor as yourself. And a stranger who dwells among you shall be as one born among you. You shall love him as yourself. If you don't have a grandson or a nephew, maybe find somebody and mentor them. If you grew up hunting, it's a hard thing to get into if nobody teaches you. Imagine just being 30-something years old and decide you want to go hunting and trying to figure it out on your own if you're somebody that grew up hunting. Imagine what an obstacle that could be. Imagine trying to understand all this stuff without a teacher. So if you have the knowledge and wisdom, if you listened to this today and you knew like pretty much all of this stuff, or more even, find somebody near you. It can be a stranger. If you think they're interested, if you see them, God puts them in your path any kind of way and you can interact with them and pass some wisdom and knowledge on, please do. You're an asset to the community. Your talents are given by God for you to pass on, to grow, and to share. So make sure we're doing that. With that, men, I want to say thanks for listening. Have a blessed day. P.S. Postscript, guys. I put out a lot of stuff today. And again, this is from my knowledge base. I may very well be wrong. If I am wrong about something, I want to correct it. I can go back and do an addendum or put it in the show notes. So if I did get something wrong, reach out to me and let me know. GoodShepherdTraining.com. Say, hey, whatever, but you got this part wrong. I hope to be a humble man. I can take correction. I put out a lot of info on this. If I got something not correct, reach out to me and let me know. Thanks. Appreciate the help. Have a blessed day.